The ballroom glittered with chandeliers worth more than her entire lifetime of savings. She had no business being there, not in her second-hand heels, not with her trembling hands that just hours ago were gripping a mop. But now, every pair of eyes turned toward her as she stood beside the most powerful billionaire in the city, his hand resting protectively at her waist as if she belonged there. And maybe, just for tonight, she would pretend she did. He leaned closer, his voice a low whisper meant only for her. "Remember," he murmured, "just pretend to be my date." But as the night unfolded, neither of them pretended anymore. Lila Summers never imagined her life would come to this. Once upon a time, she dreamed of color, of canvases and brushes, of studying at the art institute that had accepted her with a full heart. But dreams cost money, and her mother's illness didn't care for tuition or deadlines. The art school brochures had been folded into grocery lists, and paintbrushes replaced by mops. Now she worked the night shift at the Sterling Grand Hotel, the most luxurious landmark in the city. A palace of gold and marble, where she polished floors so spotless that the wealthy could see their reflections as they passed, never once stopping to see her. Lila had learned how to disappear into the background. That was her secret superpower. No one looked at the janitor. Not the executives, not the guests, not even the other staff. She existed like a shadow that made everything else shine brighter. Until that night. It was almost midnight when she finished cleaning the grand hallway outside the ballroom. A gala was underway, one of those glittering events meant for people with last names on building plaques. The music echoed faintly, muffled laughter and champagne glasses clinking. She glanced through the half-open doors once or twice, just to glimpse a world she could never enter. She didn't notice the man watching her from the far end of the corridor. "Hey," a deep voice called. Startled, Lila straightened and turned, her mop slipping slightly in her hand. The man walking toward her didn't look like a guest, though he was dressed like one. There was something restless in his stride, something heavy in his expression. His tuxedo fit perfectly, his dark hair slightly undone, his tie loosened as though he'd had enough of playing perfect. She recognized him instantly, Ethan Blackwell, Billionaire CEO. The youngest tech innovator to make the Forbes cover twice before turning 35. The man everyone admired, envied, and feared all at once. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, instinctively stepping aside. "The staff area's this way." He stopped in front of her, eyes sharp and searching. "You work here, right?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He exhaled, clearly frustrated. "Then you can help me." Lila blinked. "Help you? With what?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking toward the ballroom doors where music played faintly. "My ex-fiancé is in there, with my business rival. They want to humiliate me. I can't give them that satisfaction." Lila frowned, confused. "I'm not sure what that has to do with me, Mr. Blackwell. I need someone to act as my date," he said flatly, as if it were the most normal request in the world. Lila froze. "I'm sorry, what? Just pretend," he said quickly. "Smile. Stay beside me. Look like you belong. I'll make sure you're compensated for your time." She laughed nervously, shaking her head. "You want me to pretend to be your date? I'm a janitor, not." He cut her off. "Exactly. You're the only one here who doesn't want something from me." For a moment, their eyes locked. Lila saw no arrogance in his gaze, just weariness. The kind of exhaustion that came from a life built on constant performance. "I can't," she said softly. "I'd embarrass you." He looked at her with quiet conviction. "You'd do the opposite." There was something in the way he said it, firm, almost desperate, that made her heart skip. Against every logical instinct, she nodded slowly. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Within 20 minutes, her life transformed. Ethan made a single phone call, and the hotel stylist rushed in, pulling Lila into the staff room. Makeup was applied, her hair swept into a simple, elegant bun. A forgotten black gown from the hotel's unclaimed lost and found was altered hurriedly to fit her slender frame. When she finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked poised, graceful, like someone who belonged among crystal chandeliers and violins. But deep down, Lila still felt like the girl scrubbing floors. When Ethan saw her, even he seemed momentarily speechless. "You look..." He stopped, clearing his throat. "Perfect." She blushed, unable to meet his gaze. "You're a terrible liar." He smiled faintly. "Then it's a good thing I'm the one asking you to lie with me." The ballroom doors opened, and together they stepped into a world she'd only ever glimpsed from afar. The air was heavy with perfume and power. Diamonds glittered under chandeliers, laughter rippled like rehearsed music. As soon as they entered, whispers began to spread like wildfire. "Is that Ethan Blackwell? Who's the woman? She's gorgeous. Never seen her before." Lila could feel every gaze burning through her skin. Her hands trembled, but Ethan's steady touch at her back anchored her. "You're doing fine," he murmured softly. "I'm shaking," she whispered. He smiled without looking at her. "Good. That means you're not like them." For the next hour, she followed his lead. Smiled when he smiled, nodded politely when he introduced her as his date, Lila. She expected ridicule, disbelief, but instead, she saw envy in the women's eyes and curiosity in the men's. And beneath all the glamour, she began to see the truth. These people were flawless on the outside but hollow within. Their compliments were veiled daggers, their laughter painted in gold but empty of warmth. Ethan, however, was different from what the world saw. Beneath the cool exterior, he was guarded, lonely. He'd built an empire, but it had cost him something unseen. When his ex-fiancée, Victoria Hale, finally approached, the air around them seemed to tighten. She was stunning. Tall, blonde, wrapped in a gown worth more than Lila's yearly salary. Her smile was sugar-coated venom. "Well, Ethan," she purred, linking her arm with her new partner's, a smug man with a politician's grin. "You certainly move on fast. And, creatively, I must say, this one's quite the surprise." Lila felt her throat tighten. The eyes of the room focused on her again, waiting for her to crumble. But before she could shrink, something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the humiliation, maybe the exhaustion of a lifetime spent unseen. She lifted her chin and said calmly, "I'm priceless, actually. But thank you for noticing." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Not mocking, amused, surprised. Victoria's smile faltered. Ethan turned toward Lila, something soft and unspoken in his eyes. Pride, admiration. As the orchestra struck up a new melody, Ethan leaned in. "Would you like to dance?" "I don't know how," she admitted quietly. He smiled faintly. "Then just pretend." And so they danced, slowly, awkwardly at first, her hand trembling in his. But as the song went on, something changed. The room seemed to fade away, the chandeliers, the whispers, the world. It was just them. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, steady and sure. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible, she was seen. And for him, Ethan Blackwell, the billionaire who had everything, something about her presence made the air feel lighter. But just as she began to believe this dream could last, the spell broke. A waiter passing by froze mid-step, eyes widening in recognition. "Wait, isn't that the janitor?" The words sliced through the music like glass shattering. Every head turned, every whisper returned, sharper than before. Lila's breath caught in her chest. Her secret, her truth, was now echoing across the ballroom she never belonged in. Her cheeks burned as eyes filled with judgment stared her down. She could see Victoria smirking in satisfaction, the crowd shifting with disdain. Lila took a step back, trembling. I should go." Ethan's hand caught her wrist, firm and grounding. "Don't," he said quietly, his voice a low command that made the entire room hold its breath. But she couldn't meet his eyes. The fairy tale had ended. Midnight had come early for the janitor who dared to pretend. And as she turned toward the exit, her heart broke, not because of their judgment, but because she'd started to wish it wasn't pretend anymore. The music stopped abruptly, the laughter died, and all that remained was the deafening sound of whispers. Lila felt her face burn as dozens of eyes pierced into her like knives. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She had known this moment would come, the moment when the truth would surface. She was just a janitor who dared to step into a world that would never welcome her. The waiter's words echoed again, "Isn't that the janitor?" Lila took a shaky breath, forcing herself not to cry. The dreamlike glamour of the ballroom dissolved in an instant. The chandeliers didn't sparkle anymore. They mocked her, casting too much light on the lie she had become. "I'm sorry," she whispered, taking a step back. "I should go." But before she could move another inch, a hand closed gently but firmly around hers. Ethan's hand. Don't, he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying weight that silenced the entire room. Every whisper stopped. Even the orchestra fell still. Lila shook her head, her voice trembling. Please, Ethan, I can't stay here. They're right, I don't belong. He looked at her then. Really looked, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't pity. It was fury, not at her, but at them. At this, Ethan turned, his jaw tight, his gaze sweeping across the faces of people who had once cheered for him, admired him, used him. You're right, he said finally, his voice carrying through the ballroom with perfect, controlled clarity. She is a janitor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Lila froze, humiliation washing over her. But Ethan didn't stop. He stepped forward, his arms sliding around her shoulders protectively. She cleans this hotel every night. She works until dawn to make sure all of this, he gestured around them, stays beautiful while the rest of you sleep. A murmur spread again, quieter now, uncertain. She didn't ask to be here, he continued, his voice hardening. I asked her, because she's the only one here who doesn't wear a mask. The only one who looked me in the eye tonight without wanting something in return. Lila's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan turned toward her then, and his tone softened. You said you didn't belong here. But you do, Lila. More than any of them ever will. The ballroom was utterly still. Even Victoria Hale, his ex, who had been smirking moments ago, looked pale and uncertain now. For the first time that night, Lila didn't feel small. She stood tall beside him, her heart pounding, her throat tight with emotion. But she still whispered, you don't have to defend me. It's okay. He looked down at her with a half smile. I'm not defending you, Lila. I'm defending the truth. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. If you want to leave, I'll walk out with you. But if you can, stay. Just a few more minutes. Let's finish the dance. Lila hesitated. The room still stared at them, curiosity and discomfort mixing like oil and water. But the warmth in Ethan's voice gave her strength. Slowly, she nodded. Then let's pretend a little longer. A faint smile touched his lips. This time, we're not pretending. The orchestra, as if sensing the cue, began to play again. The same waltz as before, soft and slow. Ethan led her back to the dance floor, his hand resting lightly at her waist. As they began to move, something strange happened. The crowd that had judged them now watched in silence, transfixed. Lila's gown swayed gently with each turn, her eyes locked on Ethan's. Every step became easier, more certain, until her heart no longer raced from fear but from something she couldn't name. When the song ended, the applause was hesitant at first, then grew into something real, something that sounded almost like respect. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth set in a tight line, her rival's victory slipping away from her like sand. Lila didn't need to see it to know. She hadn't just survived the night, she had stolen it. When the guests began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, Ethan guided her quietly out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. The gardens behind the hotel were softly lit, the faint scent of jasmine drifting in the breeze. Lila exhaled shakily, the tension of the night finally breaking. I can't believe that just happened, she said, half laughing, half crying. I thought you'd be furious. He chuckled softly, his voice low. At you, never. You were the only real thing in that entire room. She shook her head, looking down. You shouldn't have done that. People will talk. They'll think you've lost your mind. Let them, he said simply. I've spent half my life worrying about what people think. Maybe it's time I stop. Lila glanced at him, her chest tightening. Why me, Ethan? Why did you pick me? He looked thoughtful for a moment, his gaze distant. Because when I saw you cleaning that hallway, you looked peaceful. Everyone else tonight was chasing attention, power, control. You were just being, and I realized I hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. Her heart ached at his honesty. He wasn't the untouchable billionaire she thought he was. He was human, lonely, tired. She smiled faintly. I think you've forgotten something, Mr. Blackwell. What's that? I was supposed to pretend. He smiled back, stepping closer. Maybe I was the one pretending. The words hung in the air between them, soft and dangerous. Lila's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. His eyes held her there, unspoken emotions passing like electricity. Finally, she whispered, "I should go. I still have a shift tomorrow night." Ethan's expression flickered, disappointment quickly masked by gentleness. "Then let me at least drive you home." She shook her head. "I take the bus." "Not tonight," he said quietly. The ride was silent but comfortable. When they reached her small apartment building, she hesitated before getting out. "Thank you. For tonight. For not letting them." "Don't thank me," he interrupted softly. "You didn't need saving. You saved me tonight, Lila." Her breath caught. "From what?" He smiled sadly. "From forgetting what's real." For a long moment, neither moved. The night was still, heavy with things unsaid. "Good night, Ethan," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Good night, Lila." He watched her walk inside until the door closed behind her. But that wasn't the end. Weeks passed. The gossip faded. The tabloids had moved on. But something had shifted for Ethan. He began showing up at the hotel. Not as a guest, but quietly, in the late hours, when most people were gone. Sometimes to check on new renovation projects, sometimes just to talk. They became friends, if you could call it that. He'd bring coffee, ask about her art, listen when she spoke. He found solace in her simplicity, and she found courage in his faith in her. Then one evening, he asked her to meet him somewhere special. When she arrived, she found herself standing before a building under construction. The sign outside read, "The Summers Center for Art and Innovation." She stared, eyes wide. "What is this?" "It's for people like you," he said quietly. "People who have dreams but never get the chance. Classes, materials, scholarships. A place to start again." Her voice broke. "You did this for me." "No," he said, his gaze warm. "You inspired it. You reminded me that not everything valuable wears a suit or a diamond necklace." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "You're going to make a lot of people believe again, Ethan." He stepped closer, his voice tender. "You already made me believe again." And under the fading evening light, she realized something powerful. That night at the gala had been more than a masquerade. It had been a beginning. The janitor who had once scrubbed the floors of the Sterling Grand Hotel now stood tall, not as a prop in someone else's story, but as the spark that changed it. And the billionaire who thought he had everything had finally found what he didn't know he was missing. They no longer needed to pretend. Because sometimes, when life forces you to play a part, pretending becomes the first step towards something real.